If you had told me 3 years ago that I would end up mopping the floors of my own house while my wife's friends stood in the kitchen laughing at me, I would have told you that you had the wrong life. But that is exactly what happened. And by the time I understood how I got there, I had already lost almost everything I thought belonged to me. My name is Daniel Reyes. I am 44 years old, and this happened in a suburb just outside Denver, Colorado. For 13 years, I built a landscaping and hardscape construction company from nothing. A single used pickup truck, a set of hand tools I bought with a credit card I couldn't really afford. I called it Reyes Outdoor Design. By the time everything fell apart, we had 11 employees, a warehouse full of equipment, a client list that included some of the nicest properties in 3 counties. I want to be clear about something before I go further. I am not telling you this story because I think I'm some kind of hero. I made mistakes. The biggest one was trusting a person with my entire life, without ever once asking her to show me the paperwork. My wife's name was Vanessa. We met when I was 29, still driving that same beat-up truck, still doing most of the labor myself because I couldn't afford to hire enough hands. She was sharp, organized, good with numbers in a way I never was. When we got married 2 years later, it felt like the missing piece had finally shown up. I told her more than once that I was terrible at paperwork, and that I trusted her to handle the business side of things while I focused on growing the company. She smiled every time I said it. She'd say something like, "That's what partners are for, Danny. You build it, I'll protect it." For a long time, that arrangement worked. She handled our taxes, our insurance renewals, our vendor contracts. I handled the crews, the client relationships, the actual dirt under the fingernails work of building something real. Looking back now, I can see the shape of what was happening long before I understood it. Little things. She started asking me to sign documents quickly, sometimes while I was mid-bite at dinner, sometimes in the driveway on my way out to a job site. Just the annual filing, she'd say, nothing exciting, just formalities. I signed without reading most of them. I trusted her. That word again. Trust. Around year 9 of the business, Vanessa suggested we restructure the company for what she called tax efficiency. She explained it to me in terms that made sense at the time. Something about liability protection, about separating personal assets from business assets so that if a client ever sued us over an accident on a job site, our house wouldn't be at risk. It sounded responsible. It sounded like something a smart couple does. I signed the paperwork she put in front of me, without hiring my own lawyer to look it over. Because why would I need one? My wife was handling it. What I did not fully register, because I did not read the documents closely enough, was that the restructuring made Vanessa the majority shareholder of the holding company that owned Reyes Outdoor Design. Not 50-50. Not even close. 68% to her, 32% to me. She explained it away when I noticed the number months later, said it was necessary for some financing arrangement with the bank, said it was temporary, said we'd adjust it back once the loan was paid off. I believed her. I always believed her. I remember one specific evening, maybe 2 years before everything came apart, when I actually did try to slow down and read one of the documents she handed me. It was late, I was tired, from a 12-hour day pouring a paver patio for a client out in Cherry Creek. Vanessa slid a stack of papers across the kitchen table with a pen already resting on top, the way you'd set a table for dinner. I picked up the first page and actually started reading it, sentence by sentence. And she noticed. She let out a small laugh, not unkind exactly, but pointed. Since when do you read these? You hired me to handle this so you wouldn't have to. I remember feeling almost embarrassed, like I'd overstepped some boundary in our marriage, just by wanting to understand my own business. I put the page down. I signed where she'd flagged with a sticky note. I think about that moment more than almost any other from those years, because it was the clearest chance I had to catch what was happening. And I let a joke talk me out of it. The house followed a similar pattern. When we refinanced in year 10 to fund a new equipment purchase, the new mortgage and title ended up solely in Vanessa's name. Again, framed to me as a technical necessity related to her stronger credit score at the time. I remember feeling a small flicker of unease when I signed that one, a kind of quiet voice in the back of my head, asking why my name wasn't on the house I had been paying for since we bought it. I told that voice to be quiet. I had a business to run. Around that same period, our crew foreman, a steady, quiet man named Tamaz who had been with me almost from the beginning, mentioned once in passing that he'd seen Vanessa at the warehouse on a Saturday when I was out of town for a supplier conference, going through the filing cabinets, with a man he didn't recognize. I asked her about it that weekend, half joking. She waved it off, said it was a meeting with a new insurance adjuster reviewing our liability coverage. I didn't push it. I had a business to run, 3 crews in the field, and a mind that was, if I'm honest, more comfortable thinking about drainage grading and retaining wall footings than it was thinking about who was walking through my own warehouse without me. The unraveling started slowly, the way these things usually do. Vanessa began spending more time with a group of women from her yoga studio, women whose husbands owned car dealerships and medical practices, women who took trips to Cabo and posted about it while I was out digging drainage trenches in 90-degree heat. She started making small comments about my hands, about the dirt under my nails, about how I smelled like cut grass even after I showered. At first, I laughed it off. Then I started noticing she wasn't laughing along with me. The final piece I didn't see coming, though I probably should have, was a man named Craig Whitfield. Craig ran a property investment firm, had been a client of ours for about 2 years, mostly small hardscaping work around his rental properties. Vanessa started handling more of the correspondence with him directly, something I didn't think twice about because she'd always managed vendor and client paperwork. I found out much later that those meetings had stopped being about invoices, a long time before I noticed anything was wrong. The day everything broke open started like any other. I drove to the warehouse at 6 in the morning, same as always, and found the gate locked. A new padlock, one I didn't recognize. My key didn't work. I called our office manager, a woman named Priya who had been with me for 6 years. She didn't pick up. I called Vanessa. She answered on the 4th ring, sounding like she'd been expecting the call. Danny, we need to talk. Come by the house tonight after work, not the warehouse, the house. What do you mean come by the house? I live at the house, Vanessa. There was a pause on the line. That told me everything before she said another word. Just come by tonight, she said. Zand hung up. So I want to tell you I fought hard that day to figure out what was happening. But the truth is, I spent most of it in a kind of numb disbelief, sitting in my truck outside a warehouse I had built from nothing, unable to get inside. When I finally did reach a lawyer that afternoon, the first lawyer I had ever personally hired in 13 years of running a business, he asked me a single question I will never forget. He asked whose name was on the operating agreement as majority owner. I told him I honestly didn't know for certain anymore. He told me to bring him every document I could find and call him back in the morning. That night I drove to the house. My house. Or so I still believed. Vanessa met me at the door, not inside. At the door, like I was a delivery driver. Craig Whitfield was standing behind her in the front hallway, wearing the kind of casual, expensive clothing that made it very clear he had never once dug a trench in his life. I think it's better if we do this cleanly, Vanessa said. The house is in my name, the company is majority mine, I've spoken to a lawyer and I'm prepared to be fair about your 32%. But Danny, I need you to understand, this isn't a negotiation, I've already made my decisions. As I asked her how long. She didn't answer directly. But Craig's slight shift of weight behind her told me more than words would have. I moved out that week, into a short-term rental 30 minutes away, the kind of place with thin walls and a parking lot that smelled like motor oil. The divorce filing came 2 weeks after that, faster than I thought legally possible. Which told me it had been prepared long before that night at the door. Here is where the story could have simply ended in loss. And for a while it felt like it would. The divorce proceedings dragged on for 8 months. Because so many of the assets were legally structured in Vanessa's name or majority controlled by her, my lawyer told me plainly that fighting for an even split would cost more in legal fees than I would likely recover. I settled for what I could get, which was very little. I kept my truck, my personal tools, about $40,000 in a retirement account Vanessa had somehow not gotten her hands on, and my 32% stake in a company I no longer had access to. In the weeks right after I moved out, before I'd found any real footing, I went through a period I'm not particularly proud of. I sat in that thin-walled rental most evenings, replaying 13 years in my head, trying to find the exact moment I should have asked a different question, or hired my own lawyer instead of trusting hers. My sister Marisol called me almost every night that first month, mostly just to make sure I was eating something besides gas station sandwiches. She was the one who finally said something that stuck with me. Danny, you didn't lose your skill, you lost paperwork. Those aren't the same thing, no matter how much it feels like it right now. I didn't believe her at the time. It took me most of that winter to understand she was right. I spent that winter doing something I hadn't done in over a decade. I worked for other people. A friend from the trade got me on with a property maintenance company, the kind that handled seasonal work for high-end homes around the Denver suburbs, houses with 3-car garages, circular driveways. I told myself it was temporary, a bridge until I figured out my next move. I told myself a lot of things that winter to get through the days. Then came the assignment that changed everything. Though not in the way you might expect at first. It was late February, unseasonably warm. The maintenance company sent me and another guy, Marcus, to a property for general upkeep, gutter clearing, some drywall patching in a garage. I didn't recognize the address on the work order. Streets look different when you're not driving them every day for years. But the moment I turned onto that block, well, my stomach dropped. It was my old house. Vanessa answered the door in workout clothes, holding a green smoothie. For a full 3 seconds, she looked at me like she was trying to place my face out of context. The way you sometimes don't recognize your dentist if you see them at the grocery store. Then it clicked. Oh my God, Danny. She actually laughed, a short, surprised bark of a laugh, and called back into the house. You have got to come see this. 2 women I vaguely recognized from her yoga circle came to the door. and I watched something shift in Vanessa's posture. A kind of performance switching on. "This is my ex-husband," she said, like she was introducing a novelty item. "He used to own a landscaping company, now he cleans gutters." One of the women, to her credit, looked uncomfortable. The other one laughed along with Vanessa. Vanessa handed me a mop that had been leaning against the porch railing, still smiling, playing to her audience. "Since you're here, the kitchen floor could really use it. I've got people coming for lunch." I looked at that mop for a long moment. I looked at the kitchen behind her. The kitchen where I had eaten breakfast every morning for 11 years, where I had built the island counter myself with my own hands on a weekend off. And I felt something settle in me. Not anger exactly. A clarity. "Sure," I said, happy to help. "I want to tell you I did it out of some noble restraint. But honestly, in that moment, I did it because arguing would have cost me more than mopping a floor for 10 minutes ever could." I mopped the kitchen while her friends stood in the doorway, sipping wine at 11 in the morning, occasionally making comments about how grounding it must be to do honest work with your hands. Vanessa said loudly at one point, "Careful with the baseboards. The last guy scuffed them and I had to have someone repaint." I finished the floor. I said nothing else. I left. But here is the part Vanessa did not know. The part none of them in that kitchen understood. Because none of them had ever actually worked in the industry they were laughing about. In the state of Colorado, a company that performs certain classes of construction and hardscaping work, above a specific dollar threshold, is required to have its permits pulled under an individually licensed contractor, not simply under a business entity. When Vanessa restructured our company 9 years earlier, she had made herself majority owner of the holding company. What she had never bothered to change, because at the time it hadn't seemed to matter to her, was the fact that the state contractor's license itself, the actual credential required to legally pull permits for anything beyond minor residential work, was registered to me. Personally, not to the company. To Daniel Reyes individually, tested and certified through the state licensing board 11 years earlier. For the first several months after the divorce, Craig and Vanessa had continued operating the company under my license, without much thought, because nothing had forced the issue yet. But 2 weeks before I found myself mopping that kitchen floor, my lawyer had informed me that the final settlement was complete, my shares fully bought out, my involvement with the company legally severed in every way except one detail nobody on their side had thought to address. I still held the license. I hadn't done anything with that information yet. I hadn't even fully processed what it meant. But standing in that driveway after mopping the floor, mop still slightly damp in my hand, I finally understood what my quiet years of doing things properly, of actually earning my credentials, instead of just signing whatever was put in front of me, had protected. I drove home that night and called my lawyer first thing the next morning. I asked him one simple question. Now that my ownership stake was fully settled and I had no further financial or legal ties to Ray's Outdoor Design, was I under any obligation to continue allowing the company to operate under my personal contractor's license? He was quiet for a moment, and then he said something I'll remember for the rest of my life. "Daniel, you're not under any obligation at all. In fact, given the settlement is finalized, I'd recommend formally withdrawing your license from that company's registration, as a matter of basic liability protection for yourself." I filed the withdrawal paperwork with the state licensing board that week. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a phone call full of threats or a confrontation in a driveway. It was a form submitted quietly, doing exactly what I was legally entitled to do, to protect myself. I found out what happened next the way you find out most things in a small industry. Through people who used to work for me, who still called occasionally to check in. Priya, my old office manager, phoned me about 6 weeks later, her voice tight with barely contained disbelief. Ray's Outdoor Design had 3 active commercial contracts in progress, including a large retaining wall and drainage project for a homeowners association that required permits well above the threshold for unlicensed work. When the county building department ran their routine license verification ahead of a scheduled inspection, they found the listed contractor's license had been withdrawn. Weeks earlier, the project halted immediately. Work stop orders were issued. The HOA, furious about the delay and the potential liability exposure, threatened legal action over breach of contract. Craig, it turned out, held no contractor's license of his own. He had always operated purely on the business and investment side, assuming, apparently, that the license situation was a permanent, settled matter, rather than something tied to one specific person who had every reason in the world to walk away. Vanessa scrambled to find another licensed contractor willing to take over the projects on short notice. But in an industry as tightly networked as ours, word travels fast. Contractors talk to each other. More than one person I used to consider a colleague later told me they'd heard the story of what happened at that house. Not from me, since I never told a soul, but from the women who'd been standing in that kitchen. Because apparently gossip runs in both directions. Nobody wanted to inherit a project with an active HOA dispute and a public building department violation attached to it. The company lost the HOA contract entirely, along with a penalty clause that ran into 6 figures. 2 other pending contracts fell through when clients, doing their own due diligence after hearing rumors, discovered the license issue and got nervous about liability. Within 4 months, Ray's Outdoor Design, the company I had built literally by hand over 13 years, was operating at a fraction of its former size. Its reputation, quietly poisoned in a professional community that remembers these things far longer than people expect. I did not do any of this out of some elaborate scheme. I want to be honest about that. I didn't withdraw my license as a calculated act of revenge in the moment. I withdrew it because a lawyer told me it was the smart, protective thing to do for my own liability. But I would be lying if I said there wasn't a quiet, private satisfaction in understanding exactly what that withdrawal would mean for a business that had been built, in no small part, on the foundation of my own certified expertise. Expertise nobody in that kitchen had thought worth remembering, while they were laughing at my work boots. Vanessa reached out to me once, about 5 months after the mop, after the HOA lawsuit had been filed and the company's remaining reputation had started to crumble. She asked without much preamble if there was any way I would consider coming back, in some consulting capacity, just to help stabilize the licensing situation. I told her calmly that my license was not currently available for use by any company I wasn't personally overseeing and financially invested in, and that I wished her the best in finding a solution. It wasn't cruelty. It was simply the truth, delivered without the performance she had once been so fond of. Priya was the one who called to tell me about the HOA lawsuit. But she wasn't the last person from my old life to reach out that year. Tamaz called a few weeks after her, asking carefully, almost apologetically, whether I'd consider bringing on a small crew if I ever started something new. He said he'd rather dig trenches for a company with my name attached to actual accountability than stay somewhere he no longer trusted the paperwork behind him. I told him I wasn't in a position to hire anyone yet. He told me to call him the day I was. I started my own company again that spring. Small at first, just me and two guys I trusted, working out of a rented storage unit instead of the warehouse I used to own. I named it something different this time, something that had nothing to do with the life I'd left behind. Word got around quickly in our industry about what had happened. Not the messy divorce details, which I never discussed, but the simple, factual sequence of events. A man loses his business through a restructuring he didn't fully understand, and quietly rebuilds it on the one piece of himself nobody had thought to take, because nobody had realized it was the only piece that actually mattered. I called Tamaz the same week I signed the lease on the storage unit. He showed up the next morning before I'd even finished unloading equipment, brought his own tools without being asked, the way he always used to. Having him there, doing the actual work again instead of just thinking about what I'd lost, was the first time in almost a year that the whole situation had started to feel less like a wound and more like a job in progress. The clients started calling. Some of them were people who remembered my old work, the retaining walls and drainage systems that had held up through a decade of Colorado freeze-thaw cycles without a single failure. Some of them were new, referred by contractors who respected clean, licensed, properly permitted work in an industry where cutting corners is more common than anyone likes to admit. It has been a little over 2 years now since that morning with the mop. My new company is smaller than the one I lost, but it is entirely, unambiguously mine, in a way the old one I now understand never fully was. I own my equipment outright, my name is on my own license, my own permits, my own contracts. And this time, every piece of paperwork that touches my life gets read in full by me before I sign a single line. I think about that morning sometimes. Standing in the kitchen I built with my own hands, mopping a floor while people who had never once worked an honest day with those hands laughed at what they thought I had become. I don't think about it with anger anymore. I think about it as the moment I finally understood something simple. Something that had taken me 13 years and one broken marriage to learn. You can take a man's company. You can take his house, his furniture, even his name off the paperwork that used to say he belonged somewhere. But there are some things that live in a person's hands and training and years of quiet, unglamorous effort that no lawyer, no restructuring, no clever piece of paper can ever fully take away from you. As long as you never forget you still hold them. Vanessa believed, standing in that doorway with a mop in her outstretched hand, that she had already won. That the only thing left to do was enjoy the small cruelty of watching me clean a floor I used to own. But she had no idea that the very foundation her new life was standing on had never actually belonged to her at all. People sometimes ask me now, when they hear pieces of this story, whether I regret not fighting harder during the divorce, whether I wish I'd hired a lawyer sooner, or pushed back the first time Vanessa slid a stack of papers across the table with the pen already waiting. I used to think about it that way too. But the truth I've settled into 2 years and a rebuilt company later is different. Fighting harder for a piece of a business I no longer trusted, inside a marriage that had already quietly ended long before the paperwork caught up to it, wouldn't have given me back what I actually needed. What I needed wasn't a bigger settlement. It was a clean, honest foundation to start from again, one I understood every inch of because I'd built it myself on purpose, with my eyes open this time. Tamaz still works with me. We've added 2 more guys since that first spring. And last fall, we finally outgrew the storage unit and moved into a small leased warehouse of our own. Nothing like the one I used to own, but mine in every way that matters. I kept the name simple this time. No family surname attached to T. No history for anyone to inherit or dispute later. Just initials and the word grading, stenciled on the side of a truck I own outright. I don't know what happened to Craig. I heard secondhand that he and Vanessa parted ways sometime after the HOA settlement drained a significant portion of what remained of the company's reserves, though I never confirmed the details. And I stopped asking people to update me a while ago. It isn't bitterness that keeps me from asking. It's simply that I stopped needing to know. Some chapters close on their own, quietly, without you having to watch them do it. What I carry forward instead is something much smaller and much more useful than any settlement number could have been. I read everything now. Every line, every clause before I sign it, no matter how tired I am or how much I trust the person handing it to me. Trust, I've learned, is not the same thing as blindness. And for 13 years, I confused the two. I don't confuse them anymore.